And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us. And one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it. And that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon. Tonight we're joined by my guest, Edson. Thanks for coming out here and talking with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Would you like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I am an author. I just published my first book last year. It's called Strange Light. And it is a collection of firsthand accounts of people who have had weird, unexplained, paranormal experiences of any sort. I basically interviewed a bunch of people that had all different kinds of unexplainable experiences. And then I kind of just stepped in and acted as storyteller. I tried to keep the stories as close to their actual account as I could. I wasn't trying to sort of fictionalize it or dramatize it. The changes that went in would have been like for anonymity and things like that. But
Right.
yeah, so the book kind of reads like a collection of short stories, but based on people's real experiences.
Is this something that you've always been interested in, or what kind of led you into wanting to write something about this?
Well, not exactly. I, you know, as a kid, UFOs were interesting, and some of the ancient technology type books that were out back in those days, and there were things that were interesting to me, but it didn't stick with me into adulthood. I kind of just assumed. I don't know that I was a skeptic exactly, but I was not fully on board with the reality of ghosts and psychic phenomena and UFOs and things like that. I just thought, well, that's something that maybe it's real. I don't know, but I didn't really think much about it. But over the last few years, things have kind of chipped away at my view of the universe and how strange it may or may not be. Things like the congressional testimony about unidentified aerial phenomena by David Grush and the New York Times articles. Some documentaries that I've seen about things like kids with past life memories that seem to be that the details seem to be verifiable to back to real people, and it just sort of led me little by little to this point where I was reading books about people's experiences. There's a book called Earth: A Love Story by a woman named Robin Lasseter. I read a book called UFO of God by Chris Bledsoe, and a few other things like that, where people talking about their experiences just got me really hooked on trying to understand, what was going on. I still don't, after writing this book, I have more questions than I did when I started. But it's a lot of fun to explore these topics, and yeah, I don't know exactly what I'm looking for or what I'm going to find, but it's. I think what's fascinating about these topics is that it leads to more and more questions. You never really get to the bottom of it. It seems like.
That's the one thing I struggle with is I'm always searching for answers, and the more you dig, the more questions you come out with instead of answers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, somebody told me when I was early in this project, somebody told me, you go down this rabbit hole, and then you go down this other rabbit hole, and you go down this other rabbit hole, and you find out all the rabbit holes are connected. And
Hmm.
that's what it feels like to me.
I feel like, and I've said it before, so we're probably on the same wavelength, but I think a lot of the strange phenomena all ties together one way or another.
Yeah, there's definitely some overlap there. I can't say that I understand it, but yeah, there's something going on.
Out of all the things that you've researched and interviewed with other people, what are some of the ones that kind of stand out to you that you would like to share with us in the audience? Because obviously they influence you enough to try and write a book into it and research it and everything. So, what were some of the ones that like stood out to you that you think were probably the most credible?
That's a tough one. It's so I do want to say that I went into this as a storyteller, not as like an investigator.
Hmm.
So I people sometimes would bring me you know, evidence in some form or another of maybe some uh, photos that they had taken of what they were seeing, or um, physical objects that played into their experience or things like that. Uh, but I didn't really spend a lot of time on those because I was interested in the experience itself and then the aftermath of that. So like, what effect did this have on your life going forward after this crazy weird thing happened? Um, but some of the ones that come to mind, it's tough. It's like picking your favorite kid. There's all these stories that I came to know inside and out from talking to these people, and the one that I keep thinking about is one of my neighbors uh, found out I was working on this book and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something." And we met up for coffee, and he was telling me about how his adult son had passed away at a this awful accident on a job site. Um, he was he was cleaning gutters, and he had a leaf blower backpack on. He was going up a ladder and he fell off the ladder, and the weight of the leaf blower, basically he died on impact. And it was a real tragic story. And this was a kid who had been kind of known in the community from being a high school athlete, and he was headed for bigger things in college, but then he had a kid and decided to put all that on hold and become a single dad. His the I don't know exactly what happened with the mother, but anyway, so it was this tragic story, and my neighbor was telling me about this and telling me how in the moment that it happened, somehow he heard the his son cry out for him, even though they were nowhere near each other, and that really stuck with him. He had never believed in any of these things and had never really thought about, any kind of paranormal or afterlife kinds of things. He was, a hardcore skeptic. But from that point forward, he kept getting these little signs, and things would fall into his lap just at the right time. Like they had a lawsuit because of the death on the job, and then they had a custody battle and things because I'm trying to simplify the story a little bit because the the person who died worked for another family member, and there was a whole lawsuit, but things kept falling into place, uh, you know, unexpectedly. My neighbor got a piece of mail that was really relevant for the court case that wasn't even addressed to him. It was addressed to his ex in another town. He doesn't even know exactly how it ended up in his mailbox. Um, and then just this whole series of things where the insurance company told them it was going to take weeks or months to get this information, but the trial was already underway, and they ended up getting it within like days, right when they needed it, and it turned the case. And so there were a lot of little synchronicities and signs and things going on that it really, it was a really sort of touching story because here was somebody who didn't believe in any of this stuff, and then it was just sort of it kept getting put right in his face over and over again, and it he believes it helped him get through this tragic event and um, get his grandson placed in the right family and helping with the court case and all these things. And he said now, after all this, he's open to anything. He's like, if you tell me you saw a UFO, I'm gonna believe you. If you tell me that you're a reincarnation of your great great uncle, I'm gonna believe you. He said, it just changed his whole worldview in a matter of months.
something like that is, I guess people can look at it in different aspects to it, but for me, some people would see it like maybe this is a sign of something, or some people will write it off as, well, that's just someone looking for a sign just to deal with it as a coping mechanism. And
Yeah, go ahead.
I was- I come off of things kind of skeptical, and I try and rationalize things, but there's so much stuff that I've learned that being a skeptic about stuff, you can't necessarily be a skeptic because you can't explain it. So there's a lot of things that become unexplainable, and that's where I think the whole paranormal supernatural element comes into play, because even though we can't explain it in logical terms, we think it's something not normal. Maybe this is something normal. We're just not used to it, or we don't see it that
Right.
way.
Yeah, and what was interesting is talking to these various people with all these different types of experiences. Um, it it a lot of times they were their own biggest skeptic. It's like they would say, "I keep trying to tell myself this couldn't have actually happened, but it did."
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I get that a lot when I'm talking to people where they're like, "I sometimes wonder if I'm just going crazy, but life has put me in this spot where I can't deny what happened." And it does make you wonder about it. People, when I would talk to people, you always felt that sincerity come through. um, the emotions, it's hard to fake that. The 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 level of detail in some of these, like, near death experiences, or um, UFO experiences, things like that. It's either, it's easy to write these things off as, oh, it was just a dream, or the person has a really vivid imagination, or they were taking drugs or whatever. But you know it's it gets hard after you hear enough of these stories to not think that there's something bigger going on that we just don't, like you said, we don't know exactly how to measure it, or we don't know how to take it into account in our current framework.
I think a lot of it has to do with what we're able to accept as being like a real situation, because the average person, if you tell them you've had some sort of an experience, maybe it's like paranormal or something, I think people are a little more open to like the whole ghost idea, or even like a UFO. But you start telling people you saw like some weird Bigfoot or something like that, then that's even more into the plane of people are going to be like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it becomes more unbelievable to a lot of people.
Well, and there's definitely, I think about this sometimes, that there's definitely a stigma around some of these topics,
Hmm.
um, but they come from different places. So if you're talking about ghosts and maybe contact after death or things like that, sometimes you'll get people who lean more religious being afraid of that because maybe it's demonic, or maybe it's something we shouldn't be messing with.
Right.
But if you go to the other end, if you go to like the UFO topic, then you've got people who are more science minded saying, oh, that there's no proof, and this isn't verified by evidence or whatever. But I sometimes think, the church, the religion, or the uh, military industrial complex, sometimes those people in power have reasons to encourage a stigma around these things if it threatens something that they feel keeps their power intact. So, not to go all conspiracy theorists, but we know that the Air Force and some other entities in the military industrial complex do practice those misinformation or disinformation tactics in certain scenarios. And if this is real, that they'd have lots of reason to do that. So yeah, it's hard not to think that along those lines sometimes.
I feel like when it comes to stuff like that, they do push a narrative that they want out there and certain things that they don't want us to know. I often wonder if it's not because it's not that they aren't aware of what it is, but I think they can't control it. And I think that plays a big part into it, because if they don't have the control over these phenomena, that means that they're not in the all encompassing power. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
something's above them, and I don't think they want Joe Public to know that they're not in control.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. If they came out and said there's something in our airspace and we can't do anything about it, that doesn't sound good if we're spending $1 trillion on, defense
Right.
contracts and military and all that stuff. So yeah, it definitely can be plausible at least.
Yeah, that's how I kind of look at it is I think they're aware that there's things out there. I just don't know if they're able. I don't think everything is non-human intelligence or extraterrestrial or something like that. I think a lot of the stuff that we are seeing could be possibly something that we're messing around with. But at the same time, I think there's also stuff out there that they can't explain. And that's where the gray area is because they don't want to admit to it, but they also don't want to. I guess it's like plausible deniability. They don't want to say one way or the other. That way they're not really held liable one way or the other.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And if there is some kind of non-human advanced intelligence out there that's looking down at us or studying us, it may be the case that they don't want us to be aware of them, and so that's why you can't ever really get good evidence because if they are more advanced than us to beyond a certain point, they may have a lot more control over what we can capture or what we can collect about them. We think about the military and stealth technology, but if you're coming from a whole other uh, I don't know, ecosystem or a whole other uh, manner of existence, you may have some capabilities that we don't even understand, and it makes it harder for us uh, to to collect data on that if they don't want us collecting data. I don't know if that's the reality of it, but it's something that I think about.
I think like they've been dropping interdimensional a lot lately. That's like a word that's been very podcast friendly here for the last like 5, 6, maybe up to 10 years. People talk about interdimensional stuff. And obviously that's not anything new because or dating myself, but like the Ninja Turtles, you had Dimension X where all the crane and all the other stuff was from. So
Yeah.
the theory of dimensions and different stuff is not necessarily anything new, but it is newer in the sense that the government has come out and mentioned it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That people are taking it more seriously. All these, not even just interdimensional, but sometimes you get these like crypto terrestrials. So it's some kind of intelligence that lives underground or at the bottom of the ocean or something, or
Hmm.
maybe there's a lot of different theories that it used to be that everybody just sort of was like, well, they're little gray dudes and they flew here in a metal ship from Zeta Reticuli or something. And then as we got further into this, they started going, well, maybe we're making some assumptions based on our sort of 1950s sci-fi mentality, and maybe there's something else to this instead of just the quote unquote conventional explanation. Yeah, yeah. I don't know what kind of evidence there is in those, you know, top secret clearance programs of interdimensional or some other variation, but it is interesting to hear them sort of, at least I don't know that the government exactly is saying it, but people from those positions of knowing have come out in various ways and said, yeah, this is something we're considering.
I've talked about this in a couple of different episodes, and I kind of want to see what you think about this. But throughout history, there have been reports of, and it kind of goes back along throughout all of our history, but let's just say, like in Europe, they used to have stories of like fae folk, like the fairies and other type of creatures, and they used to have fairy abductions. Like people used to come out in the woods or whatever, they'd get taken. They'd say fairies took them. Well, in modern times, people are being abducted by aliens. Same kind of concept. And if you look at the stories, they're all very reminiscent of the same thing. What if people were being abducted back then and they called them the Fae? like little beings from a different reality, like they lived in a different dimension. And now we're getting alien abductions. We're calling them ETs or whatever we want to call them. What if it's all been the same thing all along, but as we've evolved, we've started to call them stuff differently?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think there is something potentially to that. The other factor that I think about along those lines is, sometimes um, I think people have written about this idea too that sometimes whatever this phenomena is kind of maps onto the technology of our time or the mythology of our time or
Hmm.
whatever. You hear stories about these airships back in the 1800s or something that were unexplained, and uh, people reported them looking different than what they report now. But maybe there's this whole mind to mind communication thing comes up a lot in abduction stories and in paranormal things where you're getting communication without uh, audible or vocal communication. You're getting this almost like telepathic kind of communication.
Right.
So maybe there's an element of if they can whatever this is, if it can push thoughts into our heads or create a two-way communication, maybe that same thing kind of happens with the visuals, where part of it is our interpretation of in the context of our culture or our time or whatever, our interpretation doing it, our brains doing the best it can to map onto things we understand and not really able to do it.
I kind of wonder if, like, and this is just me spitballing here, but like, you know how people are able to, they claim that they're able to travel, like they meditate or whatever they do, and they're able to leave their body, like astral projection or something like that, where they travel into different realities or planes of existence as they're traveling along this astral plane. I've wondered if maybe some of these things, let's just say if that's true, if some of these things live in that different plane of existence and somehow some people are able to tap into that. So maybe the things that we're seeing have always been here. They're just in that different astral plane that we're not necessarily able to do on our own unless we somehow have the abilities like some of these other people say they do.
Yeah, 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 and maybe I've heard uh, places like the Monroe Institute where they do a lot of their research on some of these out of body and astral projection type things, where they sort of say that anybody can do this. It's just that some people are really good at it, just like with a basketball player. Some people are naturally gifted, and some people have to work in the gym 6 hours a day every day to get good at it. Um, I don't know if that's reality or if that's you know a theory that holds up, but I have heard things like that where potentially we can all access this. It's just that some people can do it without hardly trying, and other people have to go through these more elaborate meditation processes and things like that.
It's kind of like for me, like, is it your consciousness that leaves your body? So if that's the case, like it's just your thoughts. So are we actually leaving our body, or is our mind just thinking we left our body? That's where I kind of get hung up on the whole idea because when we think of things in a conscious state, it's like, okay, so we're basically in like a dream world. So what we're dreaming is actually when we go to sleep, are we actually in this dream or is it just our mind? And people are like, no, when you're dreaming and you're just thinking of this stuff. But how does someone leave their body and they take their conscience down the astral plane? It sounds to me like it's a dream. So that's where I get kind of,
Yeah,
it's weird.
I think where it gets interesting is when you start talking about things like remote viewing, where
Hmm.
people are able to, you know, project their consciousness to another location or another time or something, and be able to report back with uh, information about, you hear about the CIA or the military using these techniques, probably 30 or 50 years ago,
Right.
and then saying, well, we don't really do that anymore. Well, maybe they are, and they just changed the name of it, so we didn't think they were still doing it. But there are some really interesting cases of people who have. I think of Joe McMoneagle and his story about um, being able to remote view a Soviet sub that was being designed and manufactured secretly, and nobody believed him. They kind of blew off his remote viewing reports until the thing showed up in the waters off the coast of northern Russia, and it was unlike anything that we had expected, except for it matched up with his description. But it does raise that question of like, okay, if you're outside of your body, you don't have your eyes and your ears and stuff. What are you seeing and hearing with? You know,
Hmm.
what how is that sensory information being collected? And I don't know how that works.
I asked
It's a
someone before.
fascinating.
I've asked someone before that they do an institute where they supposedly teach people how to do this, like how to travel the astral plane. And I've never tried because I'm kind of a paranoid person, anyways. But I asked them what would happen if you're outside of your body and you're not able to get back to your body. They said, well, it doesn't happen. Like you always just wake up and you're back in your body. So again, if you just wake up, it just sounds more like you're traveling through a dream. So is this actually a real thing or are these people just dreaming? And
So
it gets weird.
I can tell. I was gonna say I can tell you an interesting story that happened to me at. So there's a place in Charlottesville, Virginia called the Monroe Institute, and I got to go to a program there. It was a week long program where they do try to teach you some of these things, and they use this sound technology where. Have you heard of like binaural beats?
Is that the thing
Um,
that's supposed to put you in like a transic state?
Kind of, yeah. So what they do is, brain waves that you've got your alpha brain waves and your delta waves and all these different things. They're at a certain frequency, and what they do, as I understand it, is let's say you want to create a 4 hertz wave in somebody's brain. Well, 4 hertz is really hard to pump through a headphones on its own because it's a really low frequency. But if you put 100 hertz in one ear and 104 hertz in the other ear, that's a 4 hertz difference, and it creates this little waver in your brain at 4 hertz. And so they use these different frequency modulations and things to try and sort of trigger the brain into different states. Anyway, and they have these meditation programs that they do, and you go there with a group. I think there were, I don't know, maybe about 15 people with us, and we all would do these sessions at the same time. You'd go into this. Each person would have this little dark, like pod, like dark room that you would go in. You'd put the headphones on, and they'd start the recording. Well, the instructors were in the control room, um, you know, starting the recording and giving us a little bit of an announcement ahead of time. This is what we're doing, and then we would put the headphones on. We would do the thing, and then we'd come back out and afterwards, and everybody would discuss if they had anything interesting happening. And there was one person in our group who said, I feel like I was in the control room. Like I left my body and went into the control room because I could see the two instructors talking to each other. And he was reporting back what they said in their conversation. And so he was asking the instructors, he's like, when you were in the control room, did you say this? And then you said that back, and then kind of recounted the conversation. But what was really weird about it was he said there was one part of it that was almost like it was muted. Like he couldn't hear it anymore. And the instructors were like, listen, even when you're doing out of body, you got to knock before you come into somebody else's private space. And it turned out the muted part was when they were talking about something that was supposed to be a surprise, and somehow he couldn't hear the surprise part because he wasn't meant to hear it yet. Uh, it was a weird it was a weird thing, and we had a number of interesting little things like that happen throughout the week where people would know things that there was not really a conventional way to explain how or why they would be able to know that. It was a pretty interesting program.
Hmm.
I didn't have any super I didn't have any out of body experiences or anything while I was there. I had some interesting things happen, but nothing on the scale of what you sometimes hear about.
Yeah. I haven't had anything like that that I'm aware of, so I can't really relate to it other than I've had a random dream of having a nosebleed, and the next day I had a nosebleed. I mean, so
Yeah, yeah.
it is like that a premonition. Like in the same day, I had a dream about a nosebleed, and then I woke later on, and like a couple hours later, I actually had a nosebleed. I mean, that's strange, but
Right, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, that's like a maybe that was your little taster of premonitions or something. I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. It's strange, but some of the other things that I've kind of wondered about, and I don't know how much of the cryptid realm you've been involved in, but I know if you've paid attention, if you have social media or anything, there's a documentary coming out that supposedly is proving the holy grail of Bigfoot lore. The Patterson Gimlin film is a hoax, which for almost 60, 70 years now, people have been debating on the legitimacy of that. But what do you think about stuff like Bigfoot or cryptids and everything? Do you think that's actually something that's a possibility, or is that not really something you're familiar with too much?
I have had a couple people that I've talked to that have talked about cryptid experiences. It kind of falls into the same category as all these other things where it's like just out of reach always. It's
Hmm.
always like uh not able to quite be verified, which is tantalizing. It's also what I'm exploring with the research I'm doing in the book that I wrote, and I'm working on a second one of a similar type. Um, it's hard to it's hard to know for sure. I'm open to these things being real, but maybe not. Maybe there's something. Maybe they fall into that same category of like it's more complicated than we think than just a unknown primate wandering the woods. Maybe it is. I don't know.
I just feel like if there is something out there that would be a flesh and blood type creature, we would have figured out by now at least something. Like
Right? Yeah.
there's been no bones, there's been no body or whatever. And people say, how often are you out in the woods? Maybe they bury their dead. They come up with all sorts of plausible excuses, but at the same time, it still doesn't matter in the sense of look how much of the world we've uncovered. We've discovered dinosaur bones and everything else, but yet we've still not found any sort of relic of a giant hominid living around here. You know what I mean? At some
Yeah.
point, you'd
Yeah.
have to have a breeding population to keep it alive. And for the amount of people that come out saying they've had sightings, but yet still no proof, it doesn't make any sort of sense. We all have phones today, and everyone has excuses as to why the phones aren't getting good quality photos. I was like, I just shot a documentary with a phone and I've got good quality on there. So I don't believe the fact that these people are filming the same things with the same sort of technology and everything looks like a blurred out tree.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, the skeptic in me wants to like not really say, "Oh yeah, I don't believe it," but at the same time, it's like, what are people seeing? I don't think everyone's just making things up for attention. Obviously, people are seeing something, but I don't know what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. Yeah, and that you get that argument sometimes that people are just doing this for attention or doing it for money or doing it for, these other motivations, but there were people that I talked to that were like, "I don't want my name out there. I don't want, please change the geographic locations of where I am because I don't want people finding out." Sometimes there were people that were like, they would tell me their story and then they'd reach out to me later and say, "You know what? I don't want you to share this after all. I kind of am getting cold feet about having my story out in the world." And yet the trajectory of their life changed because of this experience. And so that almost gives it more credibility that they're like, I don't want attention at all. So I don't know. I my approach with exploring these topics is to sort of suspend disbelief while I'm talking to people and just take them at their word and listen to their story and listen to how it impacted them and not try to do the investigator job.
Hmm.
There's plenty of people doing that. There's plenty of ways to debate that and um, question it. And you know, not saying that that's good or bad. It's just a different lane than where I am. Because to me, the stories are the interesting part. Maybe someday we will get answers on, are these cryptids real? And maybe the answers are different from one to another. Maybe some cryptids are legit, and maybe others are uh, part of myth and folklore, and maybe some of them are tied to some kind of weird non-human intelligence thing or interdimensional thing. I don't know. It's what makes it interesting to me is that these topics keep. I, I guess I would say, like, if you decide you're going to study, I don't know, physics, you're going to spend time and you're going to get more and more answers and fewer questions. Whereas with this topic, it seems like it's the other way. It's almost like it's teasing us to keep asking more and more questions as we dig further into this. So
Right. That's kind of how the concept of my show is. I'm not trying to prove or disprove anyone. I'm giving everyone a platform to come on and share their experiences. And
mhm.
whether I believe it or not, which I believe everyone that comes on here believes what they're telling me, but I can't prove one way or the other if what they're telling me is accurate or not, misidentification or something else. I wasn't, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, so
Mhm.
I can't say one way or the other. Like, I take everyone at their word. So
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
trying to tell someone, no, that's not what happened to you, because who the hell am I to say that, you know? So,
Right. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's just
For sure.
a way for people to come to terms and get it out there that, you know what, I experienced something strange and I don't know how to deal with it at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there were times in our history where we thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system or the center of the galaxy or the center of the universe. And as the centuries went on, we figured out more stuff and we're able to find new ways to measure things. And now we get to a point where we I- every generation probably thinks we've almost got this all figured out. We've got just these little corners of mystery. Maybe in our case it's the some of the quantum mechanics things that don't quite work the way we intuitively expect them to do, but we can test them and show that they do. Uh, but in reality, maybe there's a lot more complexity or weirdness to the universe, and we just haven't figured out how to measure it or how to explain it or what is behind it. Maybe we just need to be a little more sort of humble about how much we actually understand. 1,000 years from now, are we going to look back and say, "Man, those people used to think that you know solid fuel rocket boosters were the way to get to the moon"?
Hmm.
Who knows?
Yeah. So when you've done all these stories and the things you've collected over the years, out of all the topics, like, is there a specific type of topic that you enjoy the most? Like, obviously, you have the paranormal and you have UFOs or anything like that. Like, is there any one that you kind of prefer?
I think the UFO topic has been the one that's probably I come back to the most. Although some of the near death experience and past life memory stuff is really intriguing too. Um, the Some of the more traditional, like, paranormal and ghost story things, not that they're not fascinating, but they um, don't have the same level of draw for me as some of these other topics. Although a really good story sometimes will draw me in no matter what it's about. Like, there was somebody I talked to who She grew up in this house that seemed to be haunted by this little girl, and she got to know this little girl who was living, in the spirit realm or whatever terminology you want to use. Moved out of that house, grew up, and went back to talk to the current owners of that house to see if they had any similar experiences. And they reported that when they were doing some landscaping, they found a little girl's bones. They had to have the police come out and do forensics and try and find out why there was a body buried under their landscaping, and it turned out that it was a family grave of a little girl who died there, and the age matched up and everything. And it's like I'm all here for that kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
That
you can take your skeptic brain and come up with all kinds of explanations, and not to say that that's not a valid way to look at it too, but I'm still fascinated.
right. Yeah. I don't know what it is though when it comes to stories with, and maybe it's hits close to home because we've had our own run-ins around here with weird little things that I can't explain when it comes to paranormal stuff. But I always find it creepier when children are involved. I don't know what it
Yeah,
is. Like maybe because I got my own kids and stuff too. Maybe my kids are just creepy, but it just something about kids kind of creep me out when it comes to paranormal.
yeah, yeah. Or the kids that, yeah, when it's a kid that's seeing something that you're not seeing,
Right.
or remembering their family from before, and you're like, what are you talking about? That can definitely make the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
My daughter used to have an imaginary friend, and then she told us this was because she's a ghost. And that was a couple years ago. Now, my youngest has an imaginary friend, so we think he's imaginary, but he is 4 years old, just like my son, but he has a beard. It's like, oh,
Huh,
that's interesting.
that is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. But he told he's 4 years old and he lives in the house and he has it looks like him, but he has a beard. I was like, oh, okay. So
Yeah.
I don't try and I don't want to ask any more questions. I don't want to know. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but just here recently, my wife heard a voice in her ear one night. It was like 3 in the morning, and she heard a raspy hello, and the dog stood up because it heard it too. So she came back into the bed and was terrified. I was like, yeah, just go to sleep. So we have our own little random events here on and off. So I, when it comes to paranormal, I don't really, I guess that doesn't really bother me as much because it's like I live in it, so it's not really a big deal to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But well, I usually go on for about an hour, but it is a little later, so we got started later, and it for whatever reason, the state of Indiana is bipolar and decided to go from 70 degrees to basically wind chills in the negatives today. So within less
Oof.
than 24 hours, we've went from 70s to negatives, and it's freezing out here. So I was going to say, is there anything else you would like to discuss before we wrap it up? Because I'd like to talk a little bit more about your book.
Um, I guess just if there's people out there that have interesting stories that they want me to hear, you can track me down on various social media platforms or through my website, or just strangelightbook.com is probably the easiest way to find all my links.
So with this book, that is, do they get it from your website or can they get it off Amazon? Like, where is it all available at for them?
Yeah, it's wherever fine books are sold, as they say.
Okay.
You can get it from the website. You can get it if you want a signed copy. The website's the way to go. You can get it through Amazon. You can get it through Barnes and Noble's website or Books a Million. You're not going to find it on shelves in a lot of bookstores, but yeah, you can buy it online from your favorite retailer.
And you said this was the first book you'd written.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Do you plan on doing a follow up or another one?
Yeah, I'm working on a follow-up now. Basically the same format, just looking for more stories, and then trying even harder to make some sense of the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know that people have been studying this for as long as people have been seeing weird things in the night or in the sky or whatever. So I don't know that I'm the one that's going to come up with the answers, but um, it's it's still keeping me interested.
I think people like you and people like myself and some of the other ones out there that do this out of the curiosity and just seeking the stories and the trying to find the missing pieces of the puzzle. I think we do the job of helping others come forward with it. So for anyone listening, if you have a story, I would definitely reach out to him and he can maybe include it in his book because I think it's going to take a lot of people coming forward with the stories for, and that just might be that one missing piece that kind of connects the whole thing together. You never know.
Yeah, and honestly, the part of what I was hoping to do with this book was to kind of play some small part in reducing the stigma around talking about these things because there's people that have these experiences that never talk about them because they don't want to be labeled as crazy or you know whatever. And sometimes I get people talking to me that are like, I haven't told this to anyone, this part of it, because it sounds so crazy, but this is what really happened. And you know that there's a trust involved that I
Hmm.
appreciate from people when they're talking to me, and I do try to return that trust by, I'm not going to put anything out that sensationalizes somebody's story. I'm not going to put anything out that um, twists it or anything. Everybody that's in my book got to review what I wrote before it went out, and that's part of just that building trust to be more comfortable talking about these topics, even though they're weird and hard to understand.
Yeah, I think the more people that can kick the stigma of it, the tabooness off, and we become more open to talking about this thing will actually help a lot of people because I do believe I honestly think a lot of people have experiences and most of them are either writing it off or they don't want to talk about it. So they just ignore it because if they acknowledge it, then that's admitting that it's real. You know what I mean? So for
Yeah,
them, they
yeah,
just ignore it and go about their business and they don't ever want to talk about it and they don't ever think about it because then they don't have to deal with it. Like if you actually admit that, hey, there's something weird going on, or hey, I seen something strange, and they got to come back and actually deal with the fact that they actually experienced something they can't explain.
right, yeah, yeah, and it is hard sometimes to accept that weird things happen, and yeah, you do. Some people more than others completely want to write it off and pretend it never happened, and then there's other people who embrace it and go the other direction with it, and maybe they get interested in meditation or crystals, or there's all different directions people can go with it. Um,
Start a podcast and interview other people with weird experiences.
sure, yeah, exactly.
That's
Or
why I
write a
do what I
book.
do. Yep. So again, for anyone that would be interested in finding your book, what is your website? If you send me the link and everything, I can also include that in the show notes for people listening.
Yeah, it's the book is called Strange Light, and the website is strangelightbook.com.
Okay. Yeah. And if anyone has anything that they would like to reach out with you at, they can get a hold of you through the website.
Yeah, yeah, it'll have all my contact information and socials and things like that, so people can find me.
Awesome. Well, I think we can wrap this one up because at this point my feet are numb. So sorry,
Yeah, go get warmed up.
sorry to
No
the
worries.
listeners, but my thermometer out here said it is in the 20s. So not really. I didn't turn the heat on out here because again, it's been in the 70s and I didn't really think about flipping the heater on at this point. So I'm kind of out here freezing.
Yeah, I'm
But
in North Carolina, and I think we're not far behind you. I think the cold is just now starting to hit us, and by morning it's going to be really
yeah,
chilly here too.
they claim the wind chills, which I don't know if anyone can hear the wind in the background, but I'm out here in my studio and the wind is ripping because it's terribly windy and the wind chills will be -7 in the morning. It's like, how do we go from like 72 degrees to -7? It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
that's some whiplash right there.
Yeah. So Indiana, got to be bipolar on the weather. Well, Edson, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you too. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. You have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye. If you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, or you can also go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Just make sure to reach out and get a hold of me, and we will get something scheduled for a future episode. You can also find Tinfoil Tales on Facebook and Instagram. Just look for Tinfoil Tales Podcast. You can reach out to me that way too. Remember to share the show around. Word of mouth is the best way to help the show grow. And just remember, truth comes at cost. Are you willing to pay the price?